Okay, I think we're ready to begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Hot Topics in Digital Higher Education. Just in time for Halloween today, we have a hot topic indeed, tricks and treats, aka tips, for navigating state authorization in Texas. I'm Judith Sebesta, Executive Director of the Digital Higher Education Consortium of Texas. And as usual, to take care of a little bit of housekeeping, if you would please stay on mute, but please feel free to ask any questions or provide any comments or discussion in the chat box. And we will save about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for questions for both of our speakers today. So we'll be sure to get to those after both of the presentations. Also note that, as usual, our webinar will be recorded, archived, and available on the Digitex YouTube channel. We'll also be sending it out, and as well as the slides, to all of the registrants today. Also, please be sure and complete and submit our very brief webinar evaluation form. Heather will go ahead and put that link in the chat box for you, and then I'll provide a reminder at the end, and Heather will include that link in the chat box again for your convenience. So thanks, Heather, for doing that. I appreciate it. Also, I would like to thank Nicole Throne from Caption Sync for providing our live captioning today. And she did provide some directions in the chat box for you if you would like to enable the chat feature or go to the link that she's provided in order to see the chat. I would like to now introduce our distinguished speakers for today. We have Jessica Acton, who serves as Program Director for the Academic Quality and Workforce Division of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Jessica has been with the Coordinating Board since 2013 and has served as the Texas Director of SARA since 2015. Prior to joining the Coordinating Board, she worked as a curriculum developer and instructional designer, and we greatly appreciate our instructional designers, at Ashford University in Southern California. Jessica holds a master's degree from San Diego State University and a bachelor's degree from Indiana University. Joining us today also as a speaker is Cheryl Dowd, who serves as the Director for the State Authorization Network. Cheryl directs a membership organization of more than 800 post-secondary institutions and state agencies nationwide, providing activities and research to support, understand, and develop strategies to maintain state and federal regulatory compliance requirements for out-of-state activities of the member institutions. And Cheryl, that sounds like a really big job. Cheryl earned her Juris Doctorate from the University of Richmond, her master's degree in criminal justice from Bowling Green State University, and her bachelor's degree in political science from James Madison University. Cheryl and Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about state authorization. Jessica, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll let you share yours and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Judith. Well, I am Jessica. I am everything you need to know about SARA. I am your stop for Texas here. I'm sure most of you are familiar with SARA. If not, SARA is a voluntary interstate compact. It's an agreement among participating states and U.S. territories. States and territories become members of SARA, which then allows institutions located in their states to participate. Each member state or territory selects what they call a state portal entity for Texas, that is the Coordinating Board. As the state portal entity, we maintain state level membership in SARA. We review and approve institutional applications and just manage the day-to-day SARA activities in the state. The first slide I have for you here is an overview of institutional participation in Texas. Texas joined SARA in October 2015. In the first few months, we had 6 institutions participate. In the first full year, we had 77 additional institutions join By 2020, we have grown to now 126 participating institutions, and I would like to mention that we have more participating institutions than any of the other states or territories, so that's fantastic. Here's a breakdown of the types of institutions that participate in SARA. So the largest pool of participants is our private nonprofit institutions with 47 participating schools. That accounts for 37% of the total participants. The next largest group is the public universities and health-related institutions, which have 38 participating schools, or 30%. And this is followed by our public, community, technical, and state colleges, which account for 26% or 33 participating schools. And the smallest piece of the pie is our private for-profit institutions, which accounts for 7%. There are only 8 of those institutions that participate in Texas. So why participate in SARA? Well, we all know that state authorization is a requirement. If your institution is offering distance education to students located outside of Texas, you must have authorization from the state where those students are located. And each state handles authorization differently, and it can be time-consuming and expensive to sort that out. SARA simplifies this process by standardizing the requirements and centralizing the authorization process for institutions. So instead of seeking authorization from the individual states where you have students, you can go through your home state through the coordinating board and apply for SARA participation. There are currently 49 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. California is not a member of SARA. However, they do not restrict public institutions from offering online education to their residents. So how to participate in SARA? Participation is voluntary. Institutions that meet these basic requirements outlined in this slide can apply through the coordinating board. Currently, initial applications are submitted through the coordinating board's SARA portal, which requires a CB pass. Step-by-step instructions can be found on the coordinating board's website. I will say that we have encountered some technical issues with our SARA portal, so I'm also accepting initial applications via email. Renewal applications are always sent to me through email. Both the initial and renewal applications can be found on the NC SARA website. NC SARA does require an annual participation fee. Those fees are $2,000, $4,000, and $6,000 based on your student FTE. And that's total FTE is reported to IPEDS. I get a lot of questions about that on if it's just our distance education students, but it's not, it's your total student FTE. Small institutions, 2,500 students or less, they pay $2,000 each year. Mid-size institutions up to 9,999 students pay $4,000. And larger institutions with 10,000 or more students have an annual fee of $6,000. So how to maintain compliance with SARA? I didn't include this in the slide, but I think it's important to remind institutions to know what you're signing up for. When your CAO puts his or her signature next to each policy item on the SARA application, he or she is certifying that your institution understands and will adhere to SARA policies. I won't go through all 14 policy items in the application, but I did want to draw your attention to the professional licensure notifications piece. To maintain compliance with SARA, institutions must satisfy all of those federal requirements for professional licensure disclosures. The key difference is NC SARA requires institutions that are unable to determine whether the program leads to licensure to provide students with the contact information of the appropriate licensing board. So for example, if your institution has a nursing student in Arkansas, and your institution can't determine whether or not your program will allow that student to seek licensure in Arkansas, you have a responsibility under SARA policy to provide that student with the necessary contact information for the Arkansas Board of Nursing. And to help you out with that, NC SARA provides a professional licensing directory. And their directory includes contact information for counseling, nursing, psychology, social work, and teacher education licensing boards for each SARA member state. And that registry will be updated, I think, twice a year. So that'll be your location for the most up-to-date information. It's also important to know what SARA covers and does not. For instance, SARA does not replace authorization requirements of state professional licensing boards. If your institution offers a program that leads to licensure and you're planning on placing students in practicums or clinicals outside of Texas, you should be checking with a professional licensing board in that state to ensure you're in compliance. And again, I'll use the nursing example. If you have that nursing student in Arkansas and he or she is going to do their clinicals in the state of Arkansas, it would be important for you to reach out to the Arkansas Board of Nursing just to make sure they don't have any additional requirements such as registration, anything like that. The next piece is physical presence. It's important to know what triggers physical presence under SARA. Your institution can participate in SARA and conduct activities in a SARA member state that triggers physical presence. If that happens, you'll need to go through that state's non-SARA authorization processes. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of those physical triggers, but you can find that information in section 5.10 of the SARA manual. They explain there's 8 of them, so make sure you would be familiar with that. Here I have the URL for the NC SARA website. It is a wealth of information. On their website, you can find the SARA policy manual, the data reporting handbook, which data reporting is an annual requirement for SARA, and they do update that handbook regularly. This is also where you can find the institutional SARA participation applications, the professional licensure directory, and also a wonderful archive of presentations that NC SARA staff have done over the past year or so. I often refer back to those myself. I also provided the URL for the Texas SARA website. That's where you can find step-by-step instructions for our state application process. Again, we've been having some technical issues with our SARA portal, so please feel free to send me your application via email or just give me a call or shoot me an email, and we'll be happy to work with you on that. It also includes the student complaint process. So that's just a reminder that student complaints that aren't resolved at the institutional level will be sent to the coordinating board. And any of those complaints that are SARA related, we do report to NC SARA. That's one of the state requirements. And I will say, since I've been doing this since 2015, we have yet to have a SARA related complaint from any of our Texas institutions. So of course, if you have any questions at all, here's my contact information. Please feel free to email, call, I am available. And with that, I will hand it back over.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Appreciate the great information. And I did drop the links, the URLs to both NC SARA and to the state portal into the chat box. And we haven't had any questions come through yet, Jessica, but I bet folks will probably think of some perhaps as Cheryl is talking. So if you do, please feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll address them towards the end of the webinar. So thank you so much, Jessica. I guess I'll turn it over to Cheryl now to talk a little bit about the State Authorization Network.
Thank you. And thank you for that introduction earlier, Judith. That was very nice. And I really enjoyed Jessica's presentation. She really brought all of the SARA aspects into a really good nutshell. And I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully I'll do it correctly. And we will. All right. Are we seeing that okay?
That looks just fine, Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's me. Not the one in the bottom left. I'm the one towards the right. The bottom left looks like a ghost, but I looked at it more and it kind of looks like a Ms. Pac-Man character, but that's okay. I liked this Halloween theme that Judith started, so I tried to incorporate that through my slides as well. But so here I am. I'm Cheryl Dowd. I'm the director for the WCET State Authorization Network, and I was very honored to be invited by Judith to come speak with you all today. And so I'm going to cover who we are, who is the State Authorization Network. We're going to talk a little bit about state compliance. Jessica shared a little bit about that, and I'll probably covers some of the similar things. But I think what we've always said is that sometimes some of these things are worth repeating. And then federal compliance, a little bit more about professional licensure, and then Jessica and I and Judith will take some questions. Okay, so who is SAN? This is a screenshot of the SAN website. And WCET, for those of you that aren't familiar, is the WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technologies. They were developed by WICHE, the Western Compact, about 32 years ago. And to be initially for the West, but they very quickly became a national organization to support institutions and organizations in educational technologies for post-secondary education. And then about 10 years ago, it'll be 10 years this March, WCET chose to create the State Authorization Network, which is another membership national organization. We currently have about, as Judith shared, about 800 institutions, a little more, and they're nationwide, and we are very pleased to serve them. And Digitex is one of our members, so we're very happy to have a presence in Texas, and we have several other members in Texas as well. So I showed the picture of this website on purpose to let you know that this is a really in-depth place for resources. You can find, we built this website so that you would have a place to find things for yourself and also to be able to share things with your colleagues. It's written on multiple levels so that we have beginner information and we have more in-depth information. You'll see that there's a search bar up there, and I highlighted, when I did the screenshot here, I highlighted State Authorization 101. And so for those of your colleagues that are new to state authorization, you may want to send them there to get some initial information. So you'll see how it works in the drop down, and that would lead you to a page of about 10 resources that over a period of time would serve as a really good workshop for themselves, an independent study of state authorization, many aspects of state authorization. And so you'll see that the homepage of our website also includes news and what we call quick links. And what that is it's a quick access to some of the things that we know are important to our members. When you scroll down on that same web page, you'll see topic areas, and you'll see these 9 tiles. And these 9 tiles actually lead you to landing pages about these particular topics. And so you will find from there more information about what those pertain to. And I would like to specifically highlight the center square, and that is the Sensational Awards. And we have, for the last about 5 years now, given out Sensational Awards for good work done by our members. And people often say, well, Cheryl, who's doing good work, because they want to see good models. And I would say that that is the best place. Those people volunteer their work, and they've been vetted through a team each year for the Sensational Awards. Texas Women's University is an award winner, by the way. And you will see that they give you good ideas for then you to be able to think about how you would implement similar types of structures at your institution. I also put down in the bottom right corner this URL for WCET Frontiers, and that isn't just about state authorization, although we do have a lot of information there on state authorization, but that is twice weekly articles on a variety of aspects of higher ed, typically relating to educational technologies, but lately, especially with dealing with COVID, we've been a little bit more broad about some of the topic areas and have been handling some things about military students. So you will find that very instructive. It's written in a very conversational tone. So I often urge people that when they're kind of bogged down in some of the very highly technical or very legal jargon areas, you will find that this is a very good way to get kind of a conversational understanding of topics. And then you can go back to the more in-depth focus of some of the material that you can read about those topic areas. And you'll see up there the website URL that I think Judith has shared as well. Okay, so I'm going to share just kind of foundational principles to start with. So, when we're talking about state authorization, what we're talking about typically, state authorization actually does have a meaning when it's about Texas looking at Texas institutions. But often, state authorization has been worked about for the idea of out of state activity compliance. So, the activities of your institutions that are occurring in another state. So, note that we're talking about where the activity occurs, the location of where the activity occurs. So I have here an Indiana institution that has activities in Ohio. They're going to want to know if there are state regulations and laws for which they should be aware of to be able to offer activities in another state. So institutions not only should be aware of state compliance, which we'll talk about more in a minute, but also federal compliance. So if you think about it, there's state compliance and federal compliance. And we're going to go down this list of state compliance issues. So most common compliance we address is state institutional approval. And that's either by, and we'll talk about even more, state by state compliance, or what we've already talked about with Jessica about reciprocity. So that's state institutional approval. And then we have program approval, and that would be by a state professional board. So we're talking about a completely different agency in the state. And then there could be any kind of registration. It could be with Secretary of State. Sometimes it's with Department of Labor, but Secretary of State registration if you're doing business or deemed doing business in a state. And that usually is more than online, and it's usually having to do with more of a for-profit, but it's still something that an institution should be aware of, that there's another agency which could have an interest in the activity you're providing in their state. And then also we're aware of just one state that requires workers' compensation insurance for field placements. So in Colorado, we have learned that if you have a student who is doing a field placement in Colorado, other than student teaching, then you're going to need to be providing workers' compensation insurance. And you can find information for this on the SAN website. And so you may be asking, okay, well, what about military? Can't they move about from state to state and have no issues? Well, actually, under reciprocity, when they're participating in an online program in another state, if that state participates in, excuse me, is a member of reciprocity and the institution participates in reciprocity, then your student is covered for the institutional approval. But if it's not, then you do have to look to see if you need state by state approval. And the reason for that is not only for state approval, but also for military tuition assistance, because the federal government requires that there be that for military tuition assistance, that there is institutional approval for the student to be participating. And I include this down here about what about if our students are located in another country? Sometimes institutions believe that, well, we're just providing internet, through the internet. It's just, it's just our online courses that should be fine in Germany, right? Well, the situation is this: the institution should be aware of any potential tax laws, privacy laws, or any other kind of oversight of online courses that are occurring in that state. And we've learned from the Department of Defense that not everyone lives on base anymore. And so they're living on the land in that country. And so it is important to learn more about what the requirements are in another country as well. And we do have access to information on that, also on the SAM website in the area of compliance, non-reciprocity compliance, I believe is what the title said. So if you look there, or if you search in the search bar, put international compliance, you'll lead straight there. And what we've provided is a number of resources from a law firm for which we work with, often Hogan Lovells, who's provided us with very good information about international compliance. But it is more complicated than one may believe. And so I put here something that's very similar to what Jessica talked about, to understand the difference of state by state compliance versus reciprocity. So state by state compliance, our poor friends in California, are having to deal with varied oversight, varied applications, varied definitions, varied reporting, varied costs. where reciprocity provided uniformity. I worked for an institution before working for WCET, and I was doing this state by state, and it was a real challenge. And we had states where we could only provide some activities, maybe only online, maybe not experiential, had varied reporting. I remember being in Ohio doing reporting for Texas, because Texas required reporting when we started to provide experiential learning in Texas. So it could vary quite widely. So we really do have an appreciation for what reciprocity provides for us in creating a very streamlined way of doing the requirements to allow our students to be able to participate in activities in other states. So in terms of an institution's to-do list, we often encourage them to look at a number of things. First of all, determining the institution's out-of-state activities, looking at all of the activities of the institution. This could mean marketing. It could mean recruiting. It could mean, do you have a server in another state? Because that, if you are outside of reciprocity, then that could be something for which you would need to have state by state compliance, something like that. But if you're in SARA, then you don't have that to be concerned about for your out of state activity. But it is still important to keep a good list of what activities you have occurring outside of your state. We suggest that you track your students, create a process, document that process, and apply it consistently. We always encourage everyone to read the applicable state laws and regulations. And so when I indicate that, we start talking about primary authority and secondary authority. And if you're not familiar with that, the primary authority, that's the actual state laws or the regulations. The secondary authority is what I often refer to as the Cliff Notes, by reading what's on the SAN website, reading a WCET Frontiers article, reading any kind of analysis of the state laws and regulations. But it's really important that you read the state laws and regulations specifically. And then, of course, seek approval in states based upon your institution's plan. So if you are not participating in SARA, then you're going to need to have an institution approach about how you will be seeking approval in the variety of states. So that was state compliance. So we talked about with state compliance that we are getting state institutional approval, state program approval. We might need Secretary of State. We might need workers' compensation insurance. So this is something, as I said, you're going to want to keep that in the state category. So now let's talk about the federal category. And these are federal regulations that tie participation. The compliance is tied to participation in Title IV HEA programs, your ability to provide financial aid. And the ones that we most commonly talk about have to do with state authorization, which we've just discussed, professional licensure notification, which we will talk more about in just a few minutes because I know that's the elephant in the room, and then contact information for filing complaints. The contact information for filing complaints, this regulation 668.43b has been around for quite a while. This is not a new regulation, and it's the institution is required to file to provide the information for filing complaints with the accreditor and with the state and with its state approval or licensing entity and any other relevant state official or agency that would appropriately handle a student's complaint. You will likely find that your financial aid office is well versed in this regulation. It's part of institutional information, and they are very well able to help with making sure that that's appropriately managed. And then misrepresentation. I bring this one forward because this has to do with false or erroneous or misleading statements, which could include omissions of information for which your institution is providing that a student could reasonably expect to rely upon or has relied upon to their detriment. And it's really important that you remember that this misrepresentation regulation exists. It's actually, there's one specific to professional licensure, that's 668.72, when it's talking about different types of programs. And that's important when we're sharing information, that we don't want to rise to a level of misrepresentation. And that could occur when we're not periodically checking our information to make sure that it's relatively up to date. There's a reasonableness test. Wouldn't want to put something up and then never go back and check it, such that it becomes stale over a period of a few years. So we are going to want to have cycles of checking information to make sure it's relatively current. And then finally, this student identification verification. And this has to do with specifically with distance education. And it's making clear in writing any projected charges that would be associated with verification of the student's identity. You're going to want to share that with them at the time of registration or enrollment. So why is this important? Well, this is part of the federal regulations because it is making sure that the person who has registered for the course is actually participating in the course. So if your institution is charging perhaps a proctor fee, you're going to want to provide that information to the student if they're going to be paying extra at the time of registration or enrollment in the course. Okay, so as I said before, we've talked often about federal regulation of state authorization. That's 600.9C. There's a 10-year history, many stops and starts. I've referred to it as like Groundhog's Day, Bill Murray. He wakes up and it's history repeating itself. I've said it's a lot like when Brett Favre retired and then he didn't retire. It kept coming back, but we didn't have one that stuck until July 1 of this year. And so if you want to read the 10-year history and the drama that goes along with that, you can find that on the Stanton website under history. So it's tied to aid. Eligibility to dispersed aid is tied to the institution having approvals, either direct approval state by state or by participating in a state authorization reciprocity agreement. Please note that in this terminology in the regulation, they are not referring to who we know as an entity of SARA. They are talking about a broader sense of a state authorization reciprocity agreement, as though there could be other agreements that could be out there. We currently know there's SARA, but they are not regulating SARA specifically. And I want to point out in this regulation, there's also the discussion of student location, and they're requiring that the institution determine location and determine it at time of enrollment or upon a formal receipt of information from the student that the location has changed based on a process at your institution. So I've heard from the Department of Education when they've presented that they certainly expect that institutions may have different processes to determine what is when they're going to be checking on location and how they're going to define that. But the principal time periods are at time of enrollment and then when there's a formal receipt of a change, because they expect that the institutions are serving different communities. And so they know that you're going to have a different process at one institution, maybe from the other, but they want you to have a regular and what we call a defensible process, because the regulation is written as to say that it's to be documented process and is to be provided to the secretary upon request. So you're going to want to develop this process and be able to share it upon request. So this is an internal document. Okay, so here we are, the elephant in the room. We have new regulations for professional licensure notifications that became effective July 1, 2020. So these, I like to bring things down into bite-sized elements. And so what I've done here is we'll start with these 4 basic principles. So we have to understand that the regulations apply to all modalities. We have to be able to understand what type of educational program actually requires a notification. And it's going to be important to know when or how the public general notification is provided, and then what and when is a direct or individual notification required. So again, 4 basic elements, and we'll go through and break this down a little bit more, starting with how did we get to notification for all modalities? Some of you may be remembering that there was talk from 2016 through last summer about a regulation that indicated that notifications were just for distance education. Those regulations were released in final form in December of 2016, but because of the calendar of how financial aid works, those regulations missed the November 1 deadline. So we're not going to be able to become effective until July 1 of 2018. But on the eve of the effective date, the department had heard from WCT, they'd heard from SAN, they'd heard from SARA, they'd heard from other entities that the regulations really were flawed, difficult to implement because of the language that was used. So on the effective date of those regulations, they delayed them. So we didn't have a regulation come into play. Meanwhile, the department decided, well, we're not going to have this regulation come into place. We're going to have a negotiated rulemaking committee meet. And so negotiated rulemaking occurred then in the early part of 2019, and it came to consensus, lo and behold, under a number of issues dealing around accreditation and state authorization, including notifications. So that came to consensus, meaning that we could get to regulations that came from key stakeholders that will become eventually a final regulation. Meanwhile, and I said there's this drama, there was a lawsuit. And a lawsuit came about because they were indicating that the delay was done improperly. And the US District Court found that the delay was improper. So on a Memorial Day weekend, here we are on a holiday weekend, the delayed regulations became effective, which meant that they were going to then be effective until July 1 of 2020. So for 13 months, those were effective. The final regulations that we know now that just became effective came out November 1, almost a year ago now. And so we had the opportunity to implement them early, but they became absolutely effective July 1. I say all this as to say, if people at your institution are asking, oh, I thought these were for just distance education. Nope, not anymore. This was something that came out of negotiated rulemaking for all modalities. And it's something that you can say, yes, that's the way it started, but now we are at a final regulation that is effective, that is for all modalities. So now that we know that it's for all modalities, we need to know specifically the elements of of what kind of program requires notification. So I often find the paragraphs of a regulation very intimidating. So what I've done is taken the language and broken it into bullets because it becomes more like a checklist. And so I think when you look through this, and I highlighted a few words here, so you want to be able to look at your programs and compare them to the language. So we see, if you're looking at your program and you're wanting to know, does this program fit the kind of program that has to have a notification? You're going to want to ask yourself, was it designed to meet educational requirements for a specific license that is required for employment in an occupation, or advertised as meeting the requirement? And you're going to be providing information whether completion of that program would be sufficient to meet license requirements in a state, because we often people ask us about some kind of national licensing, but we're talking about state requirements. So you're going to want to look at your program, compare it to these bullets, and see if it's the kind of program that's going to require a notification. So once you've made a determination of whether it is or not, and you've determined that there are some that are going to require notifications, you're going to want to categorize this program based upon the states and territories. Now, the regulation says states, but I want to point out to everyone that the Code of Federal Regulations indicates that states means states and territories. So you're going to look at all of your programs, and you're going to look at each state and determine for the program a list of states for which the institution has determined the curriculum does meet licensure requirements, does not meet licensure requirements, or has not made a determination. So you're going to have your states are going to fall into these three categories for each of your programs. And so the Code of Federal Regulations also has indicated that public notifications may be on an internet website. So this is part of 668.43 institutional information, which you may have heard me mention a little bit ago about 668.43B, and you're wondering, well, why? Well, what institutional information in the Code of Federal Regulations is this long list of things, of consumer information that must be provided to students in order to be able to provide them with federal financial aid. So we want to make sure that we're collaborating with our financial aid office so that we're helping them put all of these things in place to make sure that the required notifications are made. So we've made these public notifications, and then there are going to be instances where we have to provide a direct or individualized disclosure. So we look at this under two categories because it's indicated that it has to be for prospective students under certain circumstances and an enrolled student under certain circumstances. So for prospective students, it's two circumstances. It does not meet the curriculum does not meet the state educational requirements where the prospective student is located, or the institution has not made a determination where the prospective student is located. Excuse me. You're going to be providing a direct notification. An email is sufficient to the student about the program in the state where the student is located prior to enrollment in the program. So you may be asking, prospective student, when is that determined? Is it when they call us? When are they prospective? When do I owe them something? And it's when you owe them when it's prior to enrollment in the program. The regulation indicates that. And those of you that read all of this like we do, when the Federal Register came out with the regulations, it includes a preamble. And so in that preamble is usually the responses to the comments that were made from the proposed regulation, but it provides us with guidance from the department about what certain terms mean. Specifically, they indicated that prior to enrollment in the program means at the time of an enrollment agreement or prior to a financial commitment. So keep in mind, we're not talking about when they first make a call. We're talking about really after you've admitted them to the institution, but before they've made a financial commitment to your institution or to the program. It depends on when you identify them as being in your programs. And then to the enrolled student, it's if the institution does not meet the state educational requirements in the location where the student is currently enrolled in the program. The notice goes to them to that effect within 14 calendar days of the institution making that determination. So just very quickly, I wanted to point out, just to reiterate a little bit of what Jessica said. What's interesting about this is prior to last summer, the SARA manual section 5.2 required direct notifications for courses and programs subject to SARA policy, direct to the student. If it did not, or no determination was made. So you had under those all three categories, a direct notification was required to the students. And back then, if the idea of you could not make a determination was still after all reasonable efforts, and you were required to provide the contact information. So the fact that the change was made last summer to align more with the federal regulations, they've kept the same portion that had to do with making all reasonable efforts and providing the contact information if you could not make a determination. So that stayed actually the same for SARA, for programs that are subject to SARA policy. And the other aspect to remember is SARA used to require that you provide if you did meet the state requirements, and you no longer have to provide a direct disclosure if the curriculum does meet. So that's where the change has been made to make it more aligned with the federal requirements. So I have here as an opportunity for questions.
Cheryl, thank you so much. Clearly, both Cheryl and Jessica are just incredible resources for us as we navigate what really can be quite complicated and tricky waters of state authorization. In relation to the state authorization network, I just want to be sure and point out that if you are a Digitex member, which means that if you are a Texas community college, you're a Digitex member by default. If you're a Texas public community college, then you you have access to the state authorization network through us. In other words, we pay for a system membership for Digitex colleges. So if you need information on that, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I can get you the login for the members only portal and can get you more information on that. And if you don't mind, Cheryl, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. So I've got some info for all of us, and then we'll get to some questions that have come in for our speakers. Let me just share my screen there so you have our contact information. And we do have a few questions that have come in. Our first one is for Jessica, but I suspect that Cheryl, you might be able to address this one as well. Could you please explain more about how California does not restrict public institutions in regards to state authorization?
Sure. So California doesn't restrict public institutions from offering online programs to their residents. And Cheryl might have some more thoughts on that.
Sure. This is a really interesting one, actually, because California just changed their law that will go into place about nonprofit privates. So here's the situation. The only oversight for out-of-state online programs would be for institutions that are for-profits. That's the way their law is written. They are currently providing no oversight over out-of-state. So we're talking about no physical presence of institutions that are either public or private nonprofit. But what they have done in this new law, and you can read about it in one of our most recent WCET Frontiers, is that the new law that'll be effective, I believe it's in a year and a half, means that if there are institutions that were formerly a for-profit that changed their financial structure to become a nonprofit in the last 10 years, then they're going to be up to, there's going to be some scrutiny about how they're going to be viewed, and they may end up being viewed as a for-profit for purposes of California oversight, even though for the purposes of the internal revenue, they are a nonprofit. So that's something that you might want to check on if you are a private nonprofit that in the last 10 years moved from being a for-profit to now being a nonprofit.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Jessica. Here's another question about military students. What about military students who have Texas residency but are located elsewhere? If they have Texas residency, do they need to be reported even though they may be in another state or country?
That is a great question. And this is why I like to start out with the idea of a slide that says it's all about location. And this is why the federal regulation had to be rewritten too, because there was a real misunderstanding. See, I don't know if you knew this, but the 2016 regulation was actually written by the department, and they didn't understand the difference between residency and location, because we know just the situation you're talking about. We've got a student who is a resident of Texas who could be living in another state and then taking courses from an institution in yet another state and trying to determine who's got oversight to protect them. And so it does have to do with the location of the student as far as the oversight for the military student. So it is important to keep track of where your military students are located. And it does matter whether they're out of the country as well.
Jessica, did you have any Texas perspective to add to that?
I was just going to say, as far as the NC SARA data reporting requirement, you would report wherever that military student was located while they were taking that course or program.
Good points, thank you. And Linda had a question about student tracking, but Cheryl, you actually answered that. She messaged me that she had gotten the answer from your presentation, but she had another question. Is there a more logical place on a college site that these public notifications should be placed over others, especially now since it isn't just for distance education courses? Yeah, good question, Linda.
That is a great question. And honestly, there isn't any one answer because it really depends on your institution and what works best for your institution. I have seen it where they keep it all in one place. I've seen it where they keep it in the division. So it's like in the health sciences division or by even department. So, you know, it's really, you're going to want to think about the student. and where is the most likely place that the student can find it without too many clicks. That's going to be important. And the other thing that we often share is that if you're going to offer it in multiple locations, make sure it's just a link to one place that houses the information so that you're not having to make updates in multiple places around your website. So I wish I could give you a better answer about what specifically is the best, but there hasn't been anything that has come to the top yet about how that is.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. Thank you. That's a great question, Linda. So we still have a little bit of time. So if anybody has any further questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. Meanwhile, I would like to ask Cheryl about something. Cheryl, so since last year, I believe SAN has had a newcomers exercise for new SAN coordinators. And I know that you actually have set up something for registration specifically for those of you who may be Digitex members. And I'm going to be sending that link out on our Digitex Google group, but I'm going to put that link here. Now, this link is specifically for Digitex members, but Cheryl, I think you might, be able to tell people, others about a way they might be able to participate in this. Could you give us a little more?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We developed this new program that we initially thought would be something that would be an onboarding kind of benefit for new coordinators. And when we say coordinators, those of you that aren't familiar with that term, the way we use it, it's the managers of the different memberships. And some memberships are larger than others. And Judith is the coordinator for Digitex, and so she has a big job. This is a big membership. And so we realized after using the this newcomers exercise during our basics workshop that our basics workshop participants thought it was a really great way to tour the SAN website and have a better understanding of the access and the enormity of the resources that we have available to them, for state authorization work. So what we decided to do, because this is, and Digitex is our first, is bring in some of these large memberships in cohorts to let them work through the tool. And when I say this, what it is it's we worked with an organization that does gaming, and so they looked at our website and they created several modules. And so it brings you through a series of questions. It's meant to be rather light. It's not a heavy lift intellectually to run through it, but it lets you see where you can move throughout the website and gain a better big picture idea of what it has to offer. So we really do encourage the Digitex contacts within the SAN membership to participate in this. And if you are at another institution that's a member of SAN and you are interested, just email me. We'll work that out to include you as well. We feel that this is something that is important. Not everyone understood that we have this rich library, if you will, of resources that can be made available for you as something to share, as I said, with your colleague who may be new to state authorization, and also more up-to-date information for you. For example, we were talking about resources, and it's wonderful that NC SARA created the professional licensure directory of the five professions that they have seen come through the data reporting. But what we have on the SAN website specific for our members are two big rich resources. One of them is the National Associations of State Licensing Boards, and we give the link for, let's say it's the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, and it takes you straight to where you can get state by state. For teaching, where you can get state by state. So it's the page from the National Association that brings you to choose the states where you want to find information. We also have the different state agencies in each state that provide a listing of what's licensed in that state. And so you click on the agency and they vary state by state widely. It's different state agencies that provide this, and some of them are more thorough than others, but it is going to get you to a place to understand what's being licensed in the variety of states. SAN's been working with a number of entities to try to reach out to programmatic accreditors and other licensing entities to help get this information out there, because we strongly believe excuse me, that the key stakeholders are not all at the table. You know, here we are doing this research, but we really need the states and we need the licensing boards, you know, to try to help us, you know, put our arms around what these programs require. Thanks for offering that. I appreciate that, Judith.
My pleasure, Cheryl. Thank you. Jessica, Cheryl, is there any last words that you wanted to share with us before I have one more thing I'd like to share? No?
Oh, you can always count on me to add one more thing. I am really grateful to have had the opportunity to speak with you all today, and thanks very much to Judith for inviting me. I just want you to know that SAN is to be here for a resource. We talk about login materials and things specific for the membership, and that is true. We do build things specifically for our members, but we have a lot of public-facing resources as well, because we do believe that it's important to help institutions to be able to have strategies to do this compliance work. And so we want to be there as your resource. And so we are very happy to accept your questions on a regular basis. And I say we, I'm also talking about the Assistant Director for the State Authorization Network, Dan Silverman. So between the two of us, we run a number of different activities. We have open forum the second Tuesday of every month, where we pick a topic and we allow everyone to ask any question they want on that topic of the expert that we've brought in for that topic. So we want to keep having this member interaction opportunity. And so we hope that if you're not a member of SAN, you'll consider it. And if you're a member of Digitex and haven't really jumped in yet to participating, I hope you will. And please reach out to us with any questions that you have. Thank you very much, Judith.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate it. And the last thing I wanted to share, I think many of you are probably aware, this Hot Topics in Digital Higher Education webinar series, we do these bi-monthly. And coming up next is Open Educational Resource Sustainability, another hot topic right now. So that's going to be coming in late January, so stay tuned for more information, including our speakers, the day and time, and registration information. I want to thank both of our speakers today for this just incredible information about state authorization. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you so much, Jessica, for taking the time. I also would like to thank Nicole Throne for providing our live captioning today. And I also would like to thank all of you for joining us. And please take just a brief moment, if you don't mind, to fill out our evaluation for the webinar. And Heather, if you don't mind putting that link there just briefly for everyone. And just as a reminder, all registrants for this webinar will receive a link both to the recording and to our slides, and we'll also send a link to that evaluation as well. So everybody, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, and have a happy and safe Halloween. Goodbye.
Thank you.